brought you back up to the birchwood just as the sun starts to set. I'm going to share a story with you now about a boy called Jack, an old Scottish story about a boy who was said to not be that clever. He didn't do well at school, but he really loved his stories and he loved being outside. He liked climbing trees and watching the fish in the burn. When he was old enough to leave school, he went and got a job working for the meanest man in the area, the laird, the lord of the manor, who paid him just a few pennies a week to count his sheep in the morning, watch them out in the meadow during the day, and then make sure they all got safely home in the evening. Every day, Jack sat outside in the meadow watching the sheep. Every lunchtime, his mum would come up. She would gather hanks of wool off the hedge and she would knit long woolly scarves to keep him warm in the winter and tell him stories. When school was done, his best friend Molly would come and Jack would share the stories with her. Jack and Molly loved their stories, but the story they loved best was the one that said every 60 years at Halloween at Samhain, the trees would get up and dance, lift themselves up out of their root holes, and if you watched and only took what you needed for yourself, your friends and family, you would find diamonds and jewels embedded in the soil where they had sat. Every year Jack and Molly went and watched to see if this would be the year. And a few years went by and nothing much happened, and then one year they heard a curious sound. Not the tinkle of a dog's bell or the buzzing of a bee, but the coughing of the laird, the lord of the manor. He'd heard the stories too, and being notoriously parsimonious, wanted all those jewels for himself. Jack and Molly heard the wheat. They were quiet and watched and waited. There was a little magic in the air, and sure enough, as the sun set low in the sky, the trees started to move, get up and dance. Jack stepped into a root hole, and there he found 3-4 diamonds and put them in his pockets, but he soon heard Molly shout to him, "Jack, Jack," and he turned round and realised for every jewel he'd taken he was a little further below the ground. But he wasn't the stupid boy he'd been told he was. Taking one end of the woolen scarf his mother had knitted him and throwing it to Molly, she helped pull him back up to the surface. But they heard the creak and the rustle of the trees returning, and then they heard the voice of the laird. He was counting jewels, not a few yards into the soil, but a mile or so below the ground. 5,000 diamonds for me. Jack and Molly, being kind-hearted, ran over to where old Cruvy, the oak tree, had once embedded its roots and called down, "Sir, sir." But the laird would have none of it and would not give up his well. The trees settled back into their root holes, and the laird was never seen again. But it's said that if you go into the right wood, in the right bit of Scotland, at Halloween and listen very carefully, you can still hear his voice echoing from beneath the ground.